Um, so after that one scene, we get Otto at a abandoned pier, and this one moment, I've always originally thought that the arms talking to him was a bit silly, but it does make sense because they're programmed to help finish the experiment, and that's what they'll do by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And and he decides to rob a bank. And we do get a pretty good action sequence. I mean, a pretty good fight scene between him and Spider Man. And I really like this, especially when Spider Man saves Aunt May. And for a while, I mean, she was always negative towards Spider Man, and this completely changes her mind, and I really like that.
Me too. I personally was really glad after that she started to see him in a better light, despite what the Daily Bugle and probably most of the public at this point were thinking of him from like everything that he's been involved in.
Oh yeah, and when we get to this one scene at the party when MJ agrees to marry Jameson's son, and this like really like breaks Peter down emotionally, especially like after Harry was is really pissed at him and he slaps him like twice for not telling him where Spider Man is because of course he is Spider Man.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we get to that one moment when his powers are like really like leaving him, and it's just like everything has just come down to this. I mean, how depressed he is, but not being able to balance his life and not being able to approach the woman he loves. And it's just like you really feel for Peter in this movie, and it's really heartbreaking. And and also a fun little fact is the one alley that Peter is in when he's trying to test his wall crawling abilities before he ends up falling is the same alley that Sam Raimi used for Darkman back in 1990. And I said this before and I'll say it again. Darkman, I think, is Sam Raimi's most underrated movie.
Hmm. I personally enjoyed it, although I admit when I first saw it, I thought that it was like going a mile a minute, so it took me some time to, I think, get used to it the first time, but I enjoy it these days. It's very nice. And
So that's what you thought of Darkman?
yeah, I mean, it's definitely underrated, I think, in a lot of ways, especially depending on certain viewers, but I think that it's a rather interesting kind of superhero, you know. It's not the
Yeah, it's
best.
definitely an interesting superhero movie. I mean,
Yeah.
one that's not based off of a comic book. I mean, which is pretty interesting since Sam Raimi came up with his own character.
Yeah, I mean, most people in these cases like aren't too much on originality, but at the same time they're able to make very like good versions of some of the material that we've already got, like Spider-Man 2 being one of the best one, if not the best of the Spider-Man films that we know to date, and at the same time, you know, just other ones throughout there in different parts.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. So he begins to like put together that he might possibly not want to be Spider-Man anymore, and we get this dream scene with him and Uncle Ben, which is very, very heartbreaking. And when Uncle Ben tries to convince him tries to convince him to be Spider-Man, Peter's like, "No, Uncle Ben, I'm just Peter Parker. I'm Spider-Man no more." It's really heartbreaking. I mean, he's done. He doesn't want to do this anymore, and he ends up throwing his suit in the trash.
Yeah, I personally was very touched by that scene. I just didn't know what to think. A lot of times growing up, especially when I was having like a really bad day or I just didn't know what to think, when I felt sad, I'd look that up because it just really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, you just can't help but cry.
Yeah, really, every time. But at the same time, it was pretty interesting, you know, like he's real upset about the way life has been for him
Yeah,
ever since the 2 years passed since the last film, and he's just tired of putting his life on the line for people that either don't appreciate him or just really just don't seem to care about what he does.
yeah. his decision, though, I don't think is entirely selfish. I mean, we
No.
understand his position and the difficulty at his age to do both, balancing his normal life and his life as Spider-Man. And this is something that Sam Raimi kind of took inspiration from Superman 2. But in the difference between this and Superman 2 is that in Spider-Man 2, uh, we do get to experience a bit of time with Peter, like being normal again. And but in the case of Superman 2, Clark is only human for a short while to then get his ass kicked by some guy, and then he finds out that he made a huge mistake when General Zod and his crew have invaded Earth. But his actions are mostly seen as selfish, and even in the daughter cuts, I mean, Jor-El even says, "You want to? I mean, is this how you repay their gratitude for the sake of your selfish pursuits?" But we don't get the impression that Peter's decision is a selfish one because we understand his position and how depressed he is with his difficulty of balancing his life,
Yeah.
and he's done. He just doesn't want to do the Spider-Man thing anymore. But you can see that the montage of Peter enjoying being normal again is a tad bit corny, but I don't really mind this scene. It's a bit hilarious in some ways.
Yeah, I personally got a few laughs about it myself, and frankly, I'm actually glad that it's there because even though growing up I really enjoyed Spider-Man more than Peter Parker in both the comics and in terms of action sequences, I thought that it was nice myself to kind of like have a little bit of time in the film where you're not looking at like this decision that Peter's got, like where he's both Peter Parker and Spider Man. Just one time where he's actually just Peter Parker, being able to do the things that he always was late doing because he was out being Spider Man. But for once, he's finally just free. He's happy and normal. He's getting to do all the stuff he never got to do as
Yeah,
Spider
I mean,
Man.
he's picking
And
up on his grades, and even Dr. Connors said that he's doing good and keep it up. And we get this like one little moment where he's seeing like a bunch of police officers pass by, and he takes this large bite of a hot dog. Like, I don't give a shit.
yeah, can't say I blame him though. In my experience, when he was Spider Man, people wouldn't even give him a hot dog if his life depended on it. It was
Yeah, that's kind of sad, but I mean, but kind of hilarious at the same time.
Yeah, it just really shows the difference between his life back then and his life now, and just makes you wonder, like, why didn't he do this sooner? But at the same time, we know why
Yeah,
it can't be that way.
oh yeah, and the one moment with Jameson getting the suit from a garbage man, I've always loved. He must have given up, thrown in the towel, abandoned his sad little masquerade. And in the extended cut, he tries on the suit, and I've always loved that scene. It always made me laugh my ass off because J.K. Simmons, I cannot picture anybody else playing this character just as great as he does because really, you can't replace J.K. Simmons. You just can't.
Yeah, you can try, but let's face it, there's just no way. And frankly, regarding the scene where he actually wears the suit, I mean, I tell you guys, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. In fact, I've seen it to this day, and I still don't believe it, but it's just hilarious.
Yeah, and when he does, it's comedy gold. And
Yeah, he's just getting up on top of the desk after he knocks some pencils over, and then he jumps up, starts pretending to shoot webs all over the place, and the coworkers
they're
are
just
just
like, what the hell is he doing?
yeah, they're laughing their heads off through the blinds at the office. It's just hilarious. And
Yeah,
he notices for a second that maybe something's up, but he instantly discards it and goes right back to pretending to shoot webs.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just hilarious.
it is. And if anybody asked me who else could be a better J. Jonah Jameson if he was recast, I would say not a chance in hell. J.K. Simmons is perfect the way he is, and that's final. Uh, then this one scene with Peter and Aunt May at home having tea, and we get this heartbreaking moment when Peter finally tells Aunt May about the death of Uncle Ben, and how he was partially responsible for it. I mean, it takes a lot out of him. I mean, it's like he's finally like spilling his guts,
Yeah.
and and telling him, I mean, telling Aunt May that, I mean, he was there and he held his hand when he died. It's just like, it's so heartbreaking, and after that, I mean, she just leaves and can't even look at him. And
Yeah.
it's really it's really heartbreaking. And it's superbly acted, and it really has some like serious writing in that one scene.
Yeah, because up until this point, Aunt May always kind of felt like she was the one responsible because Peter wanted to take the subway and Uncle Ben wanted to drive him. And she always thought to herself that had she stopped him, they'd all be sitting down and having tea together. But, you know, when Peter finally comes forward with the truth, because at that point in time she thought Peter didn't have anything to do with it because he was at the library studying when it happened, but he tells her the whole story about how, the wrestling match and
Well, he didn't say anything about wrestling. He said he went to some place where he thought he could win money.
well,
But
yes, but
yeah,
he basically goes there to win money, and he won it, and the guy wouldn't pay him. Then he got robbed, and Peter said he could have stopped him when the man was running towards him, but he wanted revenge, so he let him go. He wanted a car. He tried to take Uncle Ben's, and
and the rest
Uncle
is
Ben
his.
said no, and he shot him. And Uncle Ben died that night, being the only one who wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's really heartbreaking, and I mean, you really feel sorry for Peter. I mean, especially Aunt May after just hearing the truth.
Yeah, I could still see the shock in her eyes even now. As we go back through that scene, I just couldn't believe it. She was devastated.
Yeah, she definitely was, and we get this one moment right after Doc Ock finishes his new reactor. It's as twice as big as like the one that he made previously, and there's just one thing that he needs, and that's tritium. And he goes to Harry for it, and he said he only get it to him if he gives him Spider Man. And after that, we get the burning building moment, and I always thought like, do we really need another burning building scene? But I'm just like, I don't really have like a huge problem with this one scene, and it shows like how selfless Peter truly is. I mean, he risked his own life without his powers, trying to save a little girl from a burning building, and like you mentioned before, it's both that's both very brave as well as very stupid at the same time, as you said while we were
Yeah,
watching it.
because if he was Spider-Man, that would be one thing, but normally doing something like that either in real life or in a movie a lot of times could be very very foolish because the odds of you getting in or out of there in time is like pretty slim. I think personally he lucked out, but I'm still very glad that he was able to do it even without his powers. It really shows that even without your powers, you can still be a hero at
Yeah,
times. But I honestly wouldn't encourage doing that in real life. But at the same time, I'm very glad it was there.
yeah, and we get another scene with Peter coming back to see Aunt May packing, and she gives Peter this speech of what it means to be a hero, and I always thought that this was her way of letting Peter know that she knows that he's Spider Man, or at least suspects it.
Yeah, it was like one of the best speeches I had ever heard in my life. I mean, she said, if I remember correctly, how everybody loves a hero. People line up for him, cheer them, scream their names, and years later they'll tell how they stood in the rain for hours just to get a glimpse of the one who told them to hold on a second longer. And Spider Man did that for Henry, that was the name of the boy, and he wondered where he went because he needs him.
Yeah, and we get this like one moment of like Peter like practicing to get his powers back. I mean, that's one moment where he's like trying to jump to another building, and he just falls and just injures himself in the process. And we get a good reference of Tobey Maguire's back injury. I mean, back when he was filming Seabiscuit, and I was like, that was a good try, but I mean, that's you can't help but kind of laugh at it because I mean it's a bit hilarious.
I mean, it's very serious, of course. Now, as far as that scene goes where Peter's basically like trying to jump through from one building to the next with even without his powers, to me that really is kind of like a match, like a starting point to his transformation back into Spider-Man, because he's willing, he believes in both what Aunt May said and the impact that he has as Spider-Man so much that he's willing to try again, to willingly go back to being Spider-Man, even if there's a possibility that either it won't work because he doesn't have his powers or because it might possibly kill him from the fall. But the fact to me that he not only survives that he is not either dead or paralyzed from that fall, but only like gets a minor back injury pretty much because of it, really I think says a lot. It's like the starting point of his transformation back into Spider-Man.
It definitely was, and we get this like one brief scene with MJ and Jameson's son. Sorting out through like wedding invitations, and she even tries to like replicate in some way the upside down kiss that she had with Spider-Man, and try to see if she has like the right spark that she felt, especially with that one kiss that she had with Peter, not knowing at first that he's Spider-Man, and she doesn't really like have that. She doesn't really feel that spark with Jameson's son, and I'm like, I'm glad that they captured that and left that in because it's a good way to show that she doesn't truly love this guy and she really wants Peter.
Yep. I thought that it was pretty interesting. Growing up as a kid, I didn't really understand what that scene actually meant until Brevin kind of brought that up as we were watching it a few days ago. And I really can kind of see that significance. It's interesting.
Yeah, and we get that one scene with Peter and MJ in the diner, and just right when they're about to kiss, it leads to this one moment, and it's the best moment of Peter using his spider sense. Right when Octavius throws the car at him, and of course, he dodges out of the way, saving MJ. And of course, Doc Ock tells Peter to find Spider-Man, not knowing that he is Spider-Man, and he kidnaps MJ, and it leads to probably my favorite moment with Jameson in this movie, where when he hears about MJ's kidnapping, and he finally admits that he was wrong about Spider-Man, and even flat out says that he was a hero. And the next minute, right after Peter takes his costume back, he immediately changes his mind. And it's so hilarious. It's just like, and of course, it leads to that one moment, which has probably been memed to death at this point. I want Spider-Man! It's just like so hilarious. J.K. Simmons, he's just perfect.
Yeah, I personally enjoyed that scene a lot because it shows to me that Jameson actually has a heart and maybe even idolizes Spider-Man to some degree, or at least likes the work that he does. He just doesn't want to admit it because he wears a mask, and that's the thing Jameson's mostly against. And to this day, when I watch that scene, I not only feel that he has a heart, but I keep saying to myself, as soon as he switches back after they take the suit, I feel like, just, so close. We were so freaking close. And then he goes right back to his old ways. And I think it's both funny and just a little odd, 1 minute he's one way, 1 minute the next, but I still love what he decided to do. Right after Jameson sort of like just screams at the top of his lungs that he wants Spider-Man in that scene we mentioned earlier, I thought that the scene that comes after that myself was very like just epic because right after that we get this newspaper saying Spider-Man's back, Mass Menace returns from the Daily Bugle, and then Spider-Man just appears straight out of the newspaper, and it's just like one of the best entrances I can think of because following that we get this like music thing out of the theme song again. And before, to me, it always kind of felt like they were toned down or something because he was like running on fumes before due to losing his powers or just not being able to balance both parts of his life. But now he's like rejuvenated, determined, and just ready to freaking go.
Yes.
All the way to the bitter end. And then right after that, we get like this fight scene at the clock tower that is just awesome as heck.
Yeah, and I really love what goes on in this fight between Spider-Man and Doc Ock. And then they fall onto a train, and the train scene is easily the best action scene in the movie. And it was just like they're fighting each other. I mean, on both sides of the train. I mean, and this one intense moment where he's thrown into the train, swinging on poles. Comes out of a window, and then he like dodges the oncoming train on the other side. It's just like it keeps you on the edge of your seat. I mean, I remember seeing that in theaters, and it blew my mind. And I was like, "Good God, this is probably the best scene of the movie."
Yeah.
And right when Doc Ock like knocks him out, I mean, he's sliding onto the pavement and trying to swing back and trying to get back to the train as soon as possible, and even saving two people in the process. And it's just like, good lord. And
Yeah.
even when Doc Ock uh, uh, takes out the brakes of the train, and this leads to this one moment with Spider-Man with his mask off, trying to stop the train by using like way too many webs and like stopping the train using all of his strength, which really like it wears him out and leaves him completely exhausted. And I love how grateful the people on that train are to him for saving their lives, and it just really like shows how appreciative there are. And even like one guy's like, he's just a kid no older than my son, and they're like, we won't tell anybody, as their way of like saying thank you to Spider-Man. And it's just like, it's a really beautiful and touching scene.
Yeah, because quite frankly, in my opinion, I cannot describe in words how grateful I was the first time I saw that. Because if the people of New York still hated Spider Man for all that he might have been involved in, they had an opportunity, I think, to just let him go and sort of fall to his death. But instead, they saw how much he was willing to protect them, even if it meant kind of just losing his own life in the process. So they save his life and they pretty much take him inside the train as carefully as possible. And it is like one of the best scenes I can possibly ever hope to think. And I just very much enjoyed it. It really shows how grateful the people of New York are. And even after all that, they give him back his mask and promise not to tell anybody that they know who he is or what he looks like. And to me, that is pretty much
Yeah, and
just the best
they're
thing.
willing to like uh, defend Spider-Man from Doc Ock, and I think that was really inspiring. Even though they don't have no chance against somebody like him,
Yeah.
and Spider-Man is willing to give up his life to save them, and it's just like, I mean, I really love everything about this scene. It's easily probably one of the best scenes of the film. This one scene when Doc Ock brings Spider-Man to Harry, and then he trades him for the tritium. Uh, when Harry unmasks Spider-Man and finds out that he's Peter, the shock on his face, I totally buy that. I mean, the man he has hated for the past 2 years finds out. I mean, turns out to be none other than his best friend, a man who he views as a brother. And it's just like, he's like, Peter, you killed my father. And he still believes that Spider-Man killed his father, while we know that's not true.
I think they made it kind of quick because we know that Otto is about to start up his experiment, and there's really not time to go into detail about what happened in the past.
Yeah.
Because if they were to do that,
then Otto would have like started the experiment anyway, and of course Peter has to save MJ.
Along with possibly half of New York, depending on how much devastation something like that could possibly cause.
Yeah, and so Peter goes off as Spider-Man and tries to stop Doc Ock. And of course, we get the final battle between them. It's a bit short, but it's still epic either way. And even MJ tries to help out in one certain moment. And I really like that she's not completely like the damsel in distress like she was in the previous film. She actually tries to do something, and I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, I truly thought that was an interesting change from before. And while the fight scene for, like Brevin said, is a lot shorter this time than before, I think that it's actually perfect in length when you compare it to some of the other fights they've had.
Especially the train scene.
Yeah, especially that. I mean, we've had quite a few battles, but I'm glad this one could be resolved a little bit quickly because I think at this point we've kind of established how good of a fight they can be, but we've got bigger things to take care of.
Yeah, and right when Spider-Man incapacitates him and he tries to unplug he tries to pull the plug on the reactor. Of course, I mean, it doesn't work since it's already self-sustaining. So he goes to Otto with his mask off to try to persuade him to give up his dream for the betterment of humanity. And it's really it's a very heartwarming scene. And he even used the words that Aunt May said to him, like, sometimes to do what's right that we have to be steady and we have to give up the thing that we want the most, even our dreams. And Otto realizes the error of his ways and realizes that Peter is right. And he even gives his own life to destroy his life's work, and he dies. Or does he? But before Otto destroys his reactor, MJ finds out finally that Peter is Spider-Man, and it feels earned, and it's been building up to this, and it's just like she knows that the person that she's been pursuing turns out to be Spider-Man, and it's just like there's no need for Peter to explain everything to her, and she knows his reasoning of not being with her. I mean, and of course she's heartbroken and disappointed by this, and even when she's reunited with Jameson's son, she's not like fully paying attention to her and looking at Peter from far away while he's like hanging on a crane, and even as he swings off. I mean, it shows you how much MJ truly loves Peter. And I always found it a bit odd that Harry in this one scene starts hearing his father's voice and begins to see him in the mirror, because Norman only lost his mind once he'd taken the performance enhancers and begins to talk to the darker side of his personality. And of course, this leads to Harry discovering this secret compartment which held like all of Norman's tech when he was the Green Goblin. And this was a good setup for Harry becoming the new Green Goblin, but its execution, however, in part 3 is a bit disappointing, which we will discuss in our review for Spider-Man 3. And I really like how this scene really like sets up for Harry's role in Spider-Man 3.
Well, when it comes to what I think about the scene, I honestly thought that it was, like Revan said, it is very well executed in terms of a setup. And as far as whether or not Harry, like how Harry can see his dad for the reasons he mentioned, I think it might have something to do with the fact that, you see, Harry might have like started to lose touch with reality, or he just really...
He probably did.
And it just really kind of shows like maybe where he's headed to be next. You never know.
Yeah, that's probably good. It probably was like Harry breaking away from reality. And the one scene with MJ preparing for her wedding, I mean, she leaves Jameson's son to be with Peter, and even when she is with Peter at his apartment, she professes her love to Peter and saying it's wrong for us to only feel half alive and half of themselves. And it's a great relief for Peter. I mean, that he's finally being able to get the woman that he loves. And this is the one film in the trilogy that has an actual happy ending. And that's what I love about Spider-Man 2. And the final moment with Peter going off to swing in and into action as Spider-Man, and even after MJ says, "Go get him, Tiger," I've always loved that, and it's definitely one of my favorite endings for a Spider-Man film, with Spider-Man squeaking through the city, and of course we hear Danny Elfman's score, and it's the best ending for one of the best superhero movies ever made.
I can vouch for Brevin's take on this, and I, for one, also was truly happy with the way the movie ended, because at the end of the day, like you said, we find out that MJ really didn't love John Jameson. Instead, she preferred Peter, and it's really happy for me because it shows that at the end of the day, even though Peter's still Spider-Man, when he finally gets the job done, he has someone waiting for him when he comes home. He's not alone anymore, and he's just happy to have both sides of his life possibly finally balanced.
Yeah, and it was a good relief for both Peter as well as the audience that he finally got the happy ending that he so deserved.
Yeah, 5 stars on that ending all the way through.
Yeah, definitely. I will tell you right now, Spider-Man 2 is easily the best live-action Spider-Man film that we have gotten to this point. Even though I still like the other films that we've gotten up to this point. I mean, I'm fine with the Andrew Garfield films as well as the Tom Holland films. I love the Tom Holland films in the MCU.
Me too.
But when it comes to delivering a solid Spider-Man film, they don't really capture the greatness that Spider-Man 2 has, in my opinion. While the Sam Raimi trilogy is not perfect, out of all the films in this trilogy, Spider-Man 2 is easily the best, and it's one of my favorite superhero films of all time. And still, a great sequel, and amazing in so many levels. I will have to say, Spider-Man 2 deserves an A+. Hallelujah. 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 So if you grew up on Spider-Man 2, what do you think about it even after all these years? Or if you have it, or if you have seen it recently, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. And Cameron, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me again for this video and for continuing on to our Spider-Man series. Pretty soon we'll talk about Spider-Man 3, which I have a lot of mixed feelings on, and we'll get to that later. And I also want to give a personal thank you for Rachel for, again, joining me on my channel to talk about Spider-Man 2. And I really appreciate this. And I really loved our work on E.T. And I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on the film on this channel. And guys, thank you so much, as always, for watching. I really appreciate your support. I'm looking forward to doing more videos really soon. And if you want my thoughts on old or new movies, of course, you know where to find me.